not everyone needs a spiel. Not everyone needs to be overly informed, right? As some individuals that come into your office have made the decision before they came to your office that they're moving forward with this. So if you don't need an hour-long consultation to convince them, if they're ready, let them. Don't create friction where friction isn't needed. I think that's again part of the habit and challenge that so many fall into is they're anticipating the spiel, they're anticipating the need to educate the client. And for some of your clients, that's just not necessary. And oftentimes, the more information you introduce, the more you can unravel what you're actually intending to do.
Welcome to Great Practice, Great Life by Atticus Incorporated. What if you could hang out with successful small and solo law firm attorneys, ask them about their successes and failures, their business strategies and mindset habits, then take an insight or two to guide your own growth in your practice? Each week, Steve Riley shares an in-depth look at how to work less while maintaining high client service standards, reduce your stress levels while growing your income, and find time to make changes when you are time-starved. Steve is a lawyer coach for more than 20 years and a former trial attorney. His goal is to provide strategies to help you balance your lives and grow your practice. Now, here's Steve.
Hey, Steve Riley. Welcome to this episode of Great Practice, Great Life. And today I brought back one of my dear colleagues, one of my dear friends, Lori Pulvermacher. Lori, how you doing? Welcome to the podcast.
Doing very well, Steve. Thank you.
Good. Well, one great big piece of advice that I gave you before we started, and I just want to make sure it's clear on record, don't screw this one up.
Yes, no pressure.
No pressure. Don't screw this one up. This one's a big one. Like we've got a big topic to talk about. So, and it's a provocative topic. It's a topic that I think a lot of lawyers will find interesting. Team leaders, anyone in the legal profession, associates, depending on the role that you play in life, this is a very, very interesting question. And it's one that I brought you in on, which is really how to think about helping people and how to make a difference. And what are some of the skills that you would have to develop to help people and help make a difference in their life? Now, Lori, you have been trained in these skills. You have taught these skills. You, prior to joining Atticus, you had made a brief mistake working for someone else and then joined us and corrected your poor decision-making and, on the correct path in life.
I'm on the path. Correct.
On the path. You're on the right path, helping, people have a great practice, great life path. Sometimes when we say this word, it makes people crazy. You ready? You ready for the word? Sales.
Ooh, that four-letter word, right?
It's a dirty word for a lot of people, like sales.
Mm-hmm.
And you have coached, trained, and done sales work. One could argue I've done sales work. But this is a big deal for us, a big deal because we think the growth of law firms are somewhat limited by the lawyer's thinking paradigm and mindset around sales. What are your thoughts?
Well, you said you've done the work. I've done the work. In some respects, hopefully all of our listeners have done some of this work in the past. To the extent of how effectively they've done it, how well they've embraced it, is what we're going to dive into further today.
Perfect. So our hope out of this episode is really threefold. One is that you'll shift your thinking about that dirty word called sales and expand it to a more holistic and comprehensive concept. Two, Lori is going to give you some practical tips. And then at the end, we're hoping that you'll take some of these skills and use them in your life in a responsible and fun way. Does that work for you, Lori?
It does. Let's do it.
Okay, so let's go to work. So let's talk for a little bit. When you've done sales training and you've done training, both personally and taught it, talk to me what sales means to you. Let's just go right at the dirty word. What does it mean?
Well, for me, I guess there's two definitions. One, prior to my personal sales experience, and then what I know it to be now. And so I'm no different than a lot of the folks that are listening today who do cringe at that word sales, or, hold a hand up and say, wait, no, I'm not a salesperson. I don't do sales. That's not my job, or that's not what I do, right? So we can convince ourselves that sales isn't this title that we have, or this responsibility that we have. And previously in my career, I would have told you the same thing, that I'm not a salesperson. That's not what I do. I now recognize that sales is a consultation. Sales is a conversation. Sales is identifying the challenges, the issues, the concerns, or the pains that our clients have, and identifying a solution that can support them or help them or fix that. So that's what sales is. And it really is what, again, the vast majority of our audience is going to endeavor to do. They want to be of service. They want to identify solutions that are going to work and accomplish the objectives of their clients.
It's interesting. I did a podcast with Victor Medina, who's leading our sales academy here at Atticus, and I'm going to link that in the show notes. So if anybody wants to listen to Victor's interpretation and Victor's perceptions of this, because Victor was in professional sales before he went to law school. My growth around sales went from a somewhat childish and immature perception of sales, which was kind of, for those of you that are fans of the Bill Murray movie Groundhog Day, makes me think of Ned the Head Ryerson, and there's a great scene in Ned the Head where Ned the Head Ryerson goes up to Bill Murray and says, I sell life insurance. I sell whole life, this life, that life, the other life, triple life, and you could see Bill Murray just cringing. And I think a lot of us kind of fall into that trap because we've interacted with a not really sophisticated salesperson who's trying to sell us something like a car or knives door to door, what have you. And your definition is a massive shift. And it's one I want our audience to listen for, because lawyers are trained as advocates. We are advocating for our clients. So if you go in front of a jury, you're selling a story. If you're trying to convince someone to do an estate plan that's good for their family, you're selling a story. You're selling an outcome, a particular outcome, a change. If you're advocating for something in your community, you're selling a vision. If you're trying to convince your kids to go to law school, like I am, you're selling a better life. So sometimes when you think of sales skills, we think of them in a very, very small, narrow commodity way. At the end of the day, what you're trying to do is get someone emotionally engaged in a bigger future, have them intellectually join you in that future, explore what that looks like, and then choose the future, and then take action to get into the future. So it's really more of a leadership and advocacy conversation that I've embraced as I've learned and become more, I think, experienced and more mature about how I'm trying to help people. So that's why I opened the episode with talking about helping. How do you help people?
Yeah. Well, raise a really important point, Steve, because you have a picture in your head of what that sales person looks like, sounds like, right? We've heard the term the sleazy used car salesman, terminology. And so again, there's a connotation or a definition that we have around sales and salespeople that we don't want to associate with, or we don't want the challenge or the fear, if you would, that comes with having to put ourselves in that position to be, in turn, ultimately responsible for converting sales in the firm. But boiling it down, this is the mindset piece of it. So I think it's important for our listeners to understand your mindset or your head trash around what sales is and is not, and your role as a sales individual, whether with or without that title, is going to be really important in the success and how they overcome that mindset shift.
Well, how do you coach lawyers through that? I mean, you've coached professional salespeople. You're helping lawyers deal with this. How do you coach them through it? What questions or advice do you have?
Yeah, well, I mean, in my experience with actually coaching and training sales professionals, and again, these are the individuals who have said, raised their hand, I am a salesperson, I want to be a better salesperson, that head trash still existed. So I think it's one, it's important to recognize that we all have a concern around that. Again, whether it's the title, whether it's the execution of how to convert business. But when I'm working with an attorney, I often will tell them, you don't have to love this. You just have to do it. And if you're going to do it, you have to understand what mindset and what, again, head trash you might have around that, because that's the first step to be able to put that on the shelf, address it, recognize that it's okay, but that it's going to be a barrier to them, certainly. And then we just start working through the conversation and those shifts in mindset. Again, going from pushing products or services to identifying solutions. How do we articulate that to the client? How do we have that mindset? We also have to recognize that the success rate in those consultations and in the meetings that we're having with our clients are essential to the practice. So for so many of the attorneys that we work with, Steve, they have elected to hang their own shingle. They have elected to go into business for themselves. So they don't have the luxury of just sitting behind the desk and hoping that the work comes through the door. They have to go out and drum it up. They have to be effective in those consultations and conversions. And when we start drilling into that importance and that realization, it certainly helps.
Well, nothing happens till somebody sells a client to do something,
Mm-hmm.
right? So if you're a family law lawyer, PI lawyer, it doesn't matter. Nothing happens till somebody agrees to move forward with your firm. So these sales skills and being conscious about them are critical. This is the core of, I think, what we do as a company is to help lawyers go away from just focusing on their legal skills to developing a business skill. And sales skills are hardcore business skills. So when you're coaching and advising a lawyer to try and break out of this and shift away from thinking of sales as a dirty word, is there a way that you help them pivot their thinking to more of a leadership and growth mindset? Is there a particular way, or is it just down and dirty, talking to them and getting them to apply the skill day to day?
Well, I mean, a little bit of both, but a lot of it, again, is the heavy lifting that takes place in these mindset shifts has to reside with the individual and the attorney. Right? My role is to be their guide. My role is to challenge their beliefs and their head trash on these things. But one of the biggest, I guess, supporting mechanisms is kind of doing some scripting, is having a safe place to kind of practice or role play and having an environment in which we can test that out because when we whether it's delivering an initial consultation for the first time, it's asking for a referral for the first time, it's always uncomfortable. It's always comes with friction because we have a conversation going on in our head that this isn't going to sound right, I shouldn't say this, I'm going to sound pushy, again, whatever that head trash is. So being able to kind of have a safe place to practice it and banter back and forth on it certainly helps in those relationships that we have with our clients. But ultimately, too, if you are so reserved with the fact that this is not your role and that you're not the right person for this, then there better be somebody else in the firm who is and can be. And so that might be a pivot that we have to identify, that the founder ultimately is not the closer, not doing those consultations. But again, we're working with, solo and small firm practices often, and those founders have to embrace sales as a strategy and as a critical element of success for their practice.
So that's perfect. So I'm going to, in a moment, talk to you a little bit about the challenges, what are some of the challenges you see lawyers have to work through. But I'm going to say two things to the audience. I'm going to encourage first, as you're listening to this, I want you to ask yourself, are you an advocate for your clients having a greater life and a greater outcome? Or are you just in a position where you're selling legal services? So you want to think about that from the perspective of, are you just kind of interfacing with this like it's a job and you got to do it? Or are you interfacing it like a vocation, like I'm really here to help and make a difference? The next thing I want to encourage you to think about is if you're a team leader, associate, anyone in the legal environment, if you're trying to make an impact anywhere in your life, helping people, and setting an example for people of what a great life looks like, or trying to get people to come in alignment with your values and how you want to live your life, you are selling somebody on a vision of what that looks like. So if you're a parent, you are selling, and you're just selling it in a very different way. So selling itself, it gets a dirty word because of certain behaviors, poor, poor examples, and people with poor skill sets. So as you listen to this, I'm just going to encourage you as an audience member to ask yourself, what are your perceptions? And then as Lori walks through the challenges, I want you to see and hear if there's challenges that you might have in your own mindset that can free you up and allow you to make a difference for other people. That's really what this whole conversation is about. Not really about meeting a sales quota, but realizing that some of the head trash or some of the limiting beliefs or poor skills are really some of the things that's slowing you down on making an impact. So Lori, what are some of the challenges that you've coached lawyers through, or that you see lawyers suffer through in, quote, sales?
Yeah, well, we've alluded already to kind of whatever their definition or mindset might be around sales. But additionally, we know attorneys are uber technicians. They're very comfortable in that technical role. And ultimately, they'd love to kind of reside in that role. And so, again, understanding that they have to put on the different hats, the different roles, and play the part to earn new business is essential. Again, if they're hanging their own shingle, or they have a leadership responsibility within that firm. So again, recognizing what is the technical work versus what is on the business and the business skill work that they have to do, and leaning more heavily in that area. But I think it's also important to recognize that, especially when we talk about sales and we talk about those consultations and the need to convert business, I know a lot of attorneys who are still working to hone their success ratio and their confidence in that, really struggle with asking a hard question, seeking for a definitive what happens next, are we moving forward kind of answer. And there's a sense of fear of rejection, if you would, that exists. And so they're more comfortable just, kind of blurting out the information, educating the client, and then saying, okay, well, if you want to move forward, give us a call, right? They're not pressing for a strong sales or consultative process or system. And they, in some respects, are kind of just winging it and hope, again, that the rapport that they built and the education that they provided during that initial meeting will convert a sale when they haven't actually asked for the business.
That's great. There are so many times where I see the initial consultation look more and more like a hostage negotiation, where the client figures out that sooner or later they've just got to offer something, so the lawyer stops talking. Like, okay, if I just give them something, they'll stop talking. Um, and the lawyer never thinks to ask the question. And you said something very powerful. So I'm going to give an example of this so everybody can think about it. So I was working with a group of lawyers this years ago, and one particular lawyer was having a very difficult time with his consultations. Like, he was having like a 50% closing rate. And we kept asking, like, so what are you doing? I was, oh no, I'm talking, I'm doing this, I'm doing that. Okay, let's walk through the questions. And he was great. He was such a good guy. He's a good-hearted human being. And he would do this incredible question. The question was, so now we're at the point where you have to make a decision. And what I would like you to do is go home and think about whether we're the right firm for you and what the right plan is for you. And I see you snickering because you're like, okay, so, when he said that, I said, "Now, do you do that every single time?" Yeah. And I said, so your close is to go home and think about it. I want you to change the question. The question is, here's my recommendation. Let's move forward so we can take care of this for you. Or, we worked on 3 or 4 questions, but quit telling them to go home and think about it. Right? Ask them if they would like to move forward. And he's like, well, I feel pushy. I'm like, they gave you a buying decision tip. And he's like, what do you mean? They showed up for the meeting. They're there in front of you. They showed up for the meeting. They want to work with you. That's a big tip. If they didn't want to work for you, they would not show up for the meeting. And it was so fascinating to watch them go, well, I never thought of that. I'm like, well, they took time away from their day, they dressed up, they scheduled this, they came in to see you. They want to work with you. You're doing everything you can to stop them from working with you.
Yeah, I have a similar conversation with so many of the attorneys I work with, because for that reason, they aren't assuming that the client's going to move forward. And so I ask my attorneys to approach it. It's the assumptive close, meaning you've scheduled this appointment. You may have paid a consultation fee just to have an hour of my time. You drove across town, you fought traffic, you found a parking spot, you did all of these things. And I'm going to assume that I'm not going to blow this meeting and that I'm not going to demonstrate any reason why you wouldn't want to move forward. Therefore, in my head, I'm saying this client's moving forward. And I do want to address that consult as all right, here are next steps, right? And the beautiful thing is when we deliver confidently next steps and an assumptive close mindset, our clients will follow us. They will say, "Oh, that's next. Okay, let me do what's next then." And so, why would they? Why would they carve out that time and go through that effort, and share the information they do with you, if they weren't ready to move forward? Yes, budget's always going to have a factor in there. Yes, there may be the need to marinate for a small percentage of individuals, but you really need to capitalize on that face-to-face time and the fact that they're there today and they're motivated today.
And they're scared. They're not sure what to do, and they're not sure how to move forward. And the fact that you exercise a little leadership, a little confidence, saying, "Okay, here's what we do next," or "Would you like to get started?" or "Here's how we can help." Depending on how your pricing works, let me talk to you about the pricing, how this works, what your investment is for our services. So there's a lot of things that can take this conversation to the next level. So I think those are fantastic, Lori. Any other challenges? Because we're starting to get into some really good practical tips, but I just want to make sure I answer or address any other challenges that you want to point out.
Well, I think too, it might be the basis of how that consult and how that conversation are positioned. So we want to make sure that, again, going into what truly is a sales conversation, is treated as such. And so we have to allow the client to do more of the talking, more of the sharing. The more we do that, the more they're going to enjoy the process. People enjoy talking about themselves and talking about things that are important to them, and you're gaining more kind of ammunition as to what are the motivators, what are the challenges, what are the pain points. People buy emotionally, right? They make the decisions, they rationalize it. But when they move to I want this, I move forward, it's because they're in an emotional state of mind, and we want them to be there. And so, if we're going to be successful in that consultation, we need them sharing fears and pains and challenges and hopes and dreams. So get them talking about those things, and then use that as the carrot for why that assumptive close makes sense and that they would move forward with those next steps.
That's good. So the highlight of that particular point for me is to help lawyers, team leads, non-lawyers who are doing the initials, to get past the assumption that the client is a logical creature. And generally speaking, most human beings are not logical creatures. They're emotional creatures, and they make emotional decisions and rationalize it logically afterwards. So I think it's really an incredible point, because a lot of lawyers are sitting there going, well, this is the most logical thing to do. And that's really not the motivator for a lot of people. For a lot of people, it's a different reason. It may be an act of love. It may be an act of fear. It may be an act of revenge, but they've got something, that they're trying to make a resolution or decision about. Whether it's family law or PI or anything, it's an emotional issue. So I think that's really well said and really well done. Any other challenges?
The just kind of piggybacking off what you said there, I think you've got to ensure that you're a really active listener. And for some of our attorneys who are having similar conversations, there's always nuances and unique components from one client to the other, certainly, but we can fall into kind of habit and deja vu a little bit with some of our clients, depending on the circumstances. And so we need to make sure that we truly are treating each as unique, and seeking, again, that active listening component, and turning that into asking the right types of questions. Ultimately, the objective here is to build trust. People are going to buy from people they know, like, and trust. And trust is that kind of ultimate component. The more that we genuinely demonstrate care, concern, and genuine interest, the greater we're going to bridge to that trust component. And then when we look at sales as an integral part of our business, we recognize that this is just weaving trust and support throughout every aspect of that client's experience with our firm.
Perfect. Hi, Steve. Sorry to interrupt this episode, but if you're new to Atticus and you're listening to our podcast and you don't understand how Practice Advisor works, in this particular case, you're listening to an interview that features a practice advisor who's really coaching and advising someone how to grow their practice. If you're curious on how to work with a practice advisor, I'm going to put a link in the show notes, and I'm going to give you a complimentary, no-charge practice growth diagnostic. So you can talk to one of our membership directors about how to work with a practice advisor. That if you've never had the opportunity to work one-on-one with one of our top flight practice advisors, I'm going to encourage you, as you listen to this episode, ask yourself, would somebody like this be able to help me and help me grow my practice and help me cultivate a great life? With that, thank you. I hope you enjoy the rest of the episode. All right, so let's talk about practical tips. Does that work for you?
It does.
Okay. So the one practical tip that you said, and I want to jump on, though I look like I know what I'm doing too, I'm joking about that, is the scripting. And this was something I had to learn when I started practicing, of how to script good questions. Sometimes lawyers don't script good questions. Now, we'll go to court, we spend a lot of time thinking about great questions. And a great question is a very powerful thing in front of a judge or a jury. You know, it's just a great thing. But really taking a few minutes to script great questions is probably, for me, one of the fundamental business skills that I had to learn, because then I could practice those questions and use those questions in meetings and also with referral sources. And the more powerful and the more effective I became with those questions, more authentic I could be, the more actively I could listen to their answers, and the more impactful the conversations could be. So I think you nailed that one. So I think anything you want to add about scripting, and especially around questions?
Well, questions are so powerful, and we don't ask enough questions. I think many of us were programmed, probably at a very young age, not to ask too many questions. The more questions we ask, and I fall into this habit as a parent. Why does my child ask me so many questions? And I have to be very conscientious to say, I want them asking questions. And we, as adults, have been kind of, again, conditioned not to ask too many questions. We think it sounds salesy. We think it sounds almost interrogating. But you said it, questions are so essential. And when we ask specific questions, again, we're getting the individual to do more of the talking, and we're uncovering more of their motivators. What happens all too often with attorneys is we ask a few opening questions. We don't really know how to, guide the conversation further. So then we jump into education mode. Well, let me tell you about this, and let me give you all the ins and outs of all of the services or the strategies that we're going to utilize. Those aren't the components that are going to sell them, right? We're going to get them out of that emotional mind set if we do that. So again, it goes back to that really active and engaged listening, to use questions that get them talking. And the less you say and the less you try to inform and educate, actually the better. But going to scripting, Steve, I am a big, big fan of scripts. Not that I'm going to want to sound robotic, but the more I've thought about the conversation ahead of time, the more I've actually said it out loud, to someone, to the mirror, to the wall, the better and more confidently I'm going to deliver it. And the more I'm going to be able to identify some of those key questions. I think, inadvertently, Steve, you may have put a big burden on some of our listeners, because we think we have to have this big, awesome question. Questions in general are powerful. And as you listen and you learn more about your clients, you will find those impactful questions and then be able to use those with future clients. So you can evolve and grow and build that skill set in the questioning strategies.
Okay, so if any of you feel a great burden, I hope you heard Lori, you can release the burden because it is a skill building process. And I think Lori nailed it. For me, it took me a while to learn the right question to ask at the right time. And one of the questions that I'm going to share with you, Lori, because as I'm sitting here, I learned this particular question, and hopefully this will help somebody. One of the markets I ended up in was with affluent business owners in the planning side, and I'll just focus on this because they had discretionary cash and they were usually in a hurry. And I had to frame questions that allowed me to get to issues quicker for them because they had the attention span of gnats, not unlike our lawyers, but they really, really were very pushed for time. And so I learned one question. The question it took me a while to develop was, is there anything you want to discuss, or would you just like to get started now? And it gave them the option of choosing, no, actually, I'd just like to get started now. And there were quite a few times where I would ask that question and I would just save like 2 hours of me babbling because the client was ready to get started. And so we would immediately go through the process of getting, going through how to hire us, what the investment would be, the process, and then we would start, doing the heavy lifting on the work. And the question was a very interesting one because it gave them the option to choose whether to talk about something else before they made a decision to hire or were they ready to hire. And it was amazing to me how many times I was getting ready to make some poor human being listen to me babble when they had already made a decision to start work. Let's just go to work. So it took me years to figure that one out. So years. I mean, I'm a little slow, but that one took years to figure that out. So as you listen to these questions, what Lori and I are not recommending is that you have the perfect question, is that you're learning how to evolve, and your questions will evolve as you become a better and more active listener and you start to understand the frustrations and the dangers and the opportunities and the things that your clients and prospects want from you, which is really the core of what you were talking about being consultative in your sales, really at the core, trying to get to it. So any other questions or scripts or things that you would like to pass on? And by the way, thanks for relieving them of the burden I placed on them. I appreciate that.
Well, there's so many great questions, right? And this is something that, I've gone through the exercise with different clients and attorneys. But, again, every conversation is a little bit different. So I think it's just, really important to recognize, that the question piece of it is the strongest kind of tool you can apply to that. Because in your example, Steve, not everyone needs a spiel. Not everyone needs to be overly informed, right? Some individuals that come into your office have made the decision before they came to your office that they're moving forward with this. So if you don't need an hour-long consultation to convince them, if they're ready, let them. Don't create friction where friction isn't needed. I think that's again part of the habit and challenge that so many fall into is they're anticipating the spiel. They're anticipating the need to educate the client. And for some of your clients, that's just not necessary. And oftentimes, with a percentage of your clients, the more information you introduce, the more you can unravel what you're actually intending to do. Because the more information people are presented with, the more they go, well, wait a minute, what do you mean by that? And what's that? Or I wasn't anticipating this. And now you're creating more questions and concern and worry for them that wasn't there. So one of the ways that I like to lead conversations is through questioning, but then again, listen to what they're saying and have a question as a follow-up to the information that they just gave. And when I continue doing that, and again, a lot of these strategies that we're talking about, Steve, you and I both have the benefit of having some formal sales training. So, some of these strategies that we know to pull out of our tool belt become, more conversational in tone. I'm assuming some of our listeners go, well, I can't just keep asking questions. Again, I'll sound like I'm interrogating, or it'll sound disingenuous if I just ask questions. But that's really, again, the pathway to determine, is this going to need to be an hour-long conversation? Can we move forward in 15 minutes?
I think you nailed it. And your sales training in comparison to mine is night and day. You probably, for every hour I have, you probably have 1,000. So I think you're being very generous to me about any form of sales training. Most of my training is, I would say, on the street, so to speak. Like, okay, did I get a check for that? Didn't I get a check for that? Did I get hired for that? Didn't I get a hire for that? Did I get referred for that? No, I didn't get referred for that. Why did I not? So a lot of it for me is more practical, like, you know, I shouldn't say failure based, but learning based. Okay, that didn't work. How can I improve that? That didn't work. How can I improve that? And I was very fortunate that I have a lot of clients and friends and referral sources that would give me unsolicited feedback on how I could improve. And they would they would give you direct feedback in many different ways.
You're
Oh,
lucky to have people that love you that much, Steve. Yes.
yeah.
But I think what you're raising though too is you have to you as an attorney, as a business owner, have to have this on your radar. You have to be looking at the metrics. So I've worked with multiple attorneys that kind of fall into a similar story or hypothetical situation, Steve, which isn't so hypothetical for so many of our attorneys, which is they have volume coming in. The calendar is filling up. They're in meeting after meeting after meeting, and not able to get any other work done. But effectively, the cash flow isn't there. Right? When we look into it, and I look at how many meetings are on the calendar versus how many engagement letters are going out, or how many new matters are being opened as a result, it's pretty scary. You gave the example with an attorney you work with at about a 50%. I was working with an attorney who had a 40% close ratio. And when you think about how many meetings you have to have daily and weekly and monthly, and you're only converting 40% of those, there's not any time left to execute the work or to work on the business. You have to have that many more consults just to try to convert the work. So that's a big red flag for me. I want to help that attorney in being more effective in their consultation process and make sure we have a strong system and strong scripting in place, because that's going to be a big time waste of their effort.
So that's perfect. So the practical tip there from your perspective is to pay attention to the key performance indicators, the metrics,
Oh,
and
those metrics.
yeah,
Yeah.
and the effectiveness of how your marketing slash and sales process is working, because then they'll start teaching you something. You'll start learning. Uh, One of the things that you brought up, which I think is very good, is one of the lessons I had to learn that was practical was only work with qualified prospects. And a qualified prospect, I had to define to get super clear about what a qualified prospect was, because then it started to narrow. It was a big time saver for me, because if a lot of lawyers will meet with anyone, which is just a waste of time because they're unqualified prospects. And once you realize, well, really the ones I want are the qualified prospects, then it requires you to refocus. If you're a PI lawyer, and you're meeting with somebody that has mild damages or poor liability, that's not really a qualified case. You know, if you family law lawyer, it someone who may not have the assets to afford your services, not a qualified case. So there's a lot of things that you have to think about in your marketing and sales pipeline prior to the initial to maybe clean up to improve the effectiveness above and beyond your questions.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that comes with the intake process, and we're not going down that avenue today. But once they come in, and we know too that the qualified individuals oftentimes are going to be individuals that come to you via referrals, and asking for referrals and nurturing those relationships is another sales conversation also that I would love our listeners to get more comfortable with. You probably have some strategic partners that are sending you business, but the more that you can increase the referrals coming from qualified referral sources and increasing the quality of the potential clients coming in, that's going to make your sales process easier also.
Or a great question when you're talking to an existing client, a great prospect, is the referral question. When I was in Orlando, I was in the growth programs. Josh Dorsey was leading one, Victor Medina, Mark Metzger, of course, the Glenn Finch was leading one. And, I watched Kimberly Lee lead. And we were trying to get the lawyers to understand that one of the quickest and easiest ways of getting more business in the door is a question that looks like a referral. So one of the questions that I had to learn to ask was, is there anything else that we can do to help you? Is there any other legal issues or any other legal concerns that your family's dealing with that we can do to help you? Which in itself is a question, a scripted question, but it was a question that usually opened up, yeah, I got this other issue. Can you guys deal with this? If I couldn't, we would refer it out. But it goes to paying attention to the frustrations and dangers of the client so that you ask a question. When you're coaching and advising lawyers on these skills, what are your thoughts around the referral question? How do you approach it?
Well, that's another one of those, you don't have to love it, you just have to do it type of thing. So again, we work with attorneys who are doing a mix of different marketing. Some are doing none and have a pure hopium strategy. Others who are spending significant, investment in digital marketing streams. So we have to understand that the more marketing channels coming in increases leads, certainly, but also increases the number of tire kickers or unqualified leads and potential clients that might be coming through your door. And so we put a strong focus and emphasis on those referral relationships because in a lot of respects, those individuals are already pre-sold, right? Somebody that they know, like, and trust has mentioned you by name and encouraged them to move forward with having a consultative conversation. And so there's already an increased likelihood that they will move forward for that very reason. But, again, this is that assumptive close with your clients. It's very much like with your referral sources. Listen, you've sent me business in the past, assuming you'll have future business that you can send to me. And I want to understand how I can earn that. I want to understand what's important to you. I want to make sure I understand what makes you look good in front of this client as well. So we have to be willing to ask our referral sources a lot of questions as well and have impactful conversations with them and look for ways to differentiate ourselves, because that's going to secure more of those A-type clients that we want coming through our door and increase the number of referrals.
Yeah, so the question is, how can I make you look like a hero to the client that you're going to refer to me? That's what you're saying to the advisor. The other thing I like about the referral question, I know it's a business skill and lawyers are really uncomfortable with it, but this is, a hat tip to my very frugal parents, is it costs you nothing.
Mm-hmm.
You
You
can,
already have no in your pocket.
yeah, they're right in front of you. It costs you nothing. And if you can create a habit of asking for referrals, and your team can create a habit of asking for referrals, it costs you nothing. You don't have to pay someone to help you develop, a dancing TikTok video. They're right in front of you, and they care, and they want to help, and they want to help their friends. So don't hesitate to help them help their friends by sending them to you. So that's one of the things that took me a while to really appreciate and learn. Other practical tips, anything else that you can think of as we're going through these practical tips? I got one, but go ahead. Sorry.
All right. Well, I will reiterate the scripting, the practicing of this. And you mentioned it, your family, your friends, they can be a sounding board for you on this and give you feedback. But you also might want to consider, talking with individuals that don't move forward. And is there a way to survey or understand and gain more information from folks when they don't, so that can support your understanding of what went right and what didn't. But I think as you're looking to grow this, if we have folks out there that are recognizing, yeah, I don't embody the mindset of a salesperson. I don't want to do sales. It terrifies me to even think about that. I think they need to start having a kind of a postmortem when they have these meetings. What went right? What didn't? What can I improve upon? How can I reshape the questions? What questions did I identify that I could incorporate going forward, so that this is a, in real time training and application strategy?
That's a great one. Practice, 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 and practice again. This is one of the reasons I love our group programs. This is one of the reasons I love the one-on-one coaching, is that you can practice your questions, and you could practice them, like you said, in a safe environment where you don't have too much at risk. And I like making lawyers, when we're in the group programs, practice asking each other for referrals, practice asking their practice focus statement or laser talk, practice so you can get some level of comfort and some level of authenticity around it. It's something I had to learn to do. I had to practice. And I
Well,
just,
the other piece of that, Steve, is that it's one thing to practice, and this is what the kind of the challenge that some of the attorneys I've worked with in the past ran into. They went ahead and they made the scripts and they talked it through it in their head, and then when the time came to deliver it, they still hesitated or they tripped over it. It's not just enough to develop the scripts. Part of what you're alluding to with the group programs and the ability to use peers as a sounding board is the fact that they are actually saying it out loud. And when you say it out loud, you connect, the components of your brain that create this to be more conversational. So don't just simply script it out in a Word document or run it in your head under your breath, but actually saying it out loud is going to help you identify how to make it more conversational. And when you hear your own voice saying those words, you become more familiar with it. So it becomes more natural as well.
the other benefit to being in the group program that I've noticed is that you get to hear how other people do it. And you go, wow, that's pretty good. Or I really like the way that worked. Or, oh, well, that was pretty simple. Why am I making it so hard? And it's an important element for me of the group program, being other lawyers in there, other team leads, other non-lawyers in there practicing and listening to each other, because it really improves your skill set. You're like, okay, that was really good. I like the way they said that, or, that person can say it differently and it sounds completely natural to me. The way I was saying it sounds too complicated, so this sounds better. So it's pretty cool to watch other people develop their business skills that way. Any other practical tips that you'd like to share?
Well, this is something, again, it's a business skill development. So find resources that can help you develop this. You alluded to the course that Victor Medina is doing for us, Steve. So that's a resource for our listeners. And there's other, solutions out there. You can work with a coach or somebody that can aid you with developing this. But the real practical tip is just don't delay. If there's anything that I've taken away from my experience in sales directly is that I wish I would have embraced this sooner. That this was one of those essential skills. Had I embraced it sooner, I think would have created additional opportunities, less friction in my career at different points. And is one of those things, once you embrace it, go, oh, geez, this is such a game changer. And again, it's like so many things that we work on with our clients. I wish I would have done this 10 years ago. So just knowing that, there's no time like the present, but don't delay on truly embracing the mindset and the strategy of sales in your practice.
It doesn't get better when you think about it.
Now we can talk ourselves out of it.
Yeah, it doesn't get better when you think about it. It only gets better when you do it. And that's one of the problems with skill building. Skill building is actual application of knowledge. It's the old joke. I heard knowledge is power. I had this great big poster in my home when I was a kid in high school. Einstein, knowledge is power. Knowledge is power. And I thought that was the coolest thing ever. And it took me years to realize, no, that's actually, knowledge is not power. The application of knowledge and learning from the application of knowledge is where the money's at. That's where the power is at. Knowledge itself is just information. It doesn't really help you until you take it and you run with it in some way, shape, or form.
And you just have to recognize and give yourself grace that it's going to feel awkward. It's going to feel clunky. And for most individuals, again, this is not their natural approach or style. And, and that's okay, but it's not okay to use that as a crutch or an excuse. So, work through it and just, recognize that you will hone this and it'll evolve over time.
This is a great point, though. If you're looking to dominate your market, if you're looking to be the go-to law firm, if you're looking to be the go-to lawyer, you have to understand that other lawyers have the same dream, the same belief, but they have the same fear. And that fear of not developing their business skill, that fear of not asking for referrals, that fear of learning how not to develop their sales skills is actually an advantage to you. It's probably the biggest advantage I learned when I was actively practicing is that most lawyers are so terrified to make a mistake or look stupid or look like Ned the Head Ryerson that they're afraid to do anything. They're afraid to try anything. And consequently, the willingness to take a risk like, okay, I'm going to learn how to ask for a referral. I'm going to learn how to be better on my business skills. I'm going to learn how to be a better communicator, better with my questions, better closing business. You don't have to be amazing. You just have to be about 10 to 15, maybe 20% better than all of your competitors, and you will ultimately own the marketplace. So the investment in these business skills, while they look very terrifying, I promise you on the other side of it, you'll be like, just what Lori said, why didn't I do that sooner? Why did I not think of that sooner? I've got one more, Lori, before we start to wrap up, and I got a couple closing questions for you.
All right.
We could do a whole day long podcast on this one conversation. So I know that. One of the things that as you work on your skills is to model great customer service and great client service for your team. Because I think one of the things that kills a lot of law firms and kills a lot of owners as they grow their firms and a lot of team leaders is having a poor customer service culture. And that starts with the owner. The owner has to exhibit not only a care about their clients, but a care that flows through and is exhibited and is demonstrated so that you show exquisite customer service. And I've been with lawyers that own firms and they talk about how their negative culture is and how negative the culture is. And they talk, they've got 5, 6, 20 employees. And I'm like, I don't know what to do. How do I change my culture? And I'm like, well, we take the first worst person, like the most worst negative person, and we take them out back and we shoot them first. And then we just have to replace them. And over time, we have to replace them. The first thing you need to do as a lawyer is quit complaining to your team about anything, because that's where the negative culture comes from. It comes from you. You poisoned the well that you now are drinking the water from. So if you really want to have a great team culture, you have to lead the charge and not complain to your team about your clients. Complain to Lori, complain to me, complain to your colleagues in your growth programs. Hire a coach if you don't have one, complain to the coach, but your team is not your therapist. Don't throw up on your team about your complaints about your life, your people. It's your clients is the worst place to do it. And it's probably the biggest mistake, because really you want to transform that client-centric culture. And I hear lawyers say all the time, I have a client-centric culture. If you call their law firm and you listen to how the firm phone is answered, law office or welcome to the law office of the really bored receptionist. You're like, that's not a client-centric culture. You're just
Well, maybe a client-centric culture intention, or one that's been directed but not actually realized. But I mean, you raise a very good point that, again, I talk about sales is this relationship building strategy, and it's the foundation for everything, right? So every interaction, every client conversation, everything that we do with them, and every kind of experience that we try to incorporate into the work that we do, it either builds upon that trust and that experience, or it erodes it. So it is a top-down effort, certainly, and but it does require a team to execute, because the attorney could be, just masterful in those consultations and having a really strong conversion rate, but ultimately the team has to support in the execution of those services, and you want that masterful and quality experience to be invoked in every team member.
There's a lot to say about that. And we're not going to talk anymore about that one issue. I'm just going to stop us there, because you just opened up a great big Pandora's box for me about the amazing lawyer who can close but has eroded their team. That's one of the big issues I see in a lot of firms, but I don't want to go there right now. All right, Lori, we really started with an ambitious agenda today. One was to define and think about what sales means, doesn't mean, and try and transform the definition for someone that might be holding on to sales as a naughty word. 2, we want to talk about the challenges in particular for lawyers, anyone in the legal industry, obviously. And we walk through that. And I think those challenges are applicable to any human being who's trying to make a difference for anyone else. And then we did some practical tips, some practical thoughts about how to improve your sales skills. Anything that you want to say to wrap it up today?
Well, I just hope that one, we were able to accomplish all of those things, and that our listeners walk away with kind of an expanded understanding of sales and really the critical role that it plays with their firms, with their business, and again, that they don't delay any further in really leaning into growing this skill set.
Fantastic. So take Lori's advice. I would recommend that after you listen to this episode, that you try today to use a skill somewhere that scares you a little bit to help someone have a greater life, a greater practice, exercise some leadership and help them see a bigger future for themselves or solve a problem for themselves. Because at the end of the day, that's really what you're committed to doing if you're listening to this episode or listening to this podcast. You're trying to help other people. And sales at the end of the day is helping other people. Sometimes you're paid for it, sometimes you're not. Sometimes you get paid for a hug, paid with a hug. Sometimes you get paid with a compliment. Sometimes you get paid with applause. Sometimes you get paid with money. But if you're out there trying to make a difference for somebody, take some of the advice that Lori gave you. Lori, with that, thank you for being part of today's episode.
My pleasure. Thank you, Steve.
Thanks for joining this week's episode of Great Practice, Great Life. Please tune in weekly to get the next episode. If you enjoyed the episode, please subscribe, like, and don't hesitate to share it with a friend who you think this episode could help. With that, thanks, and I hope you enjoy next week's episode.